he gets a lot of flack, but he did such amazing things around bringing to the forefront, looking at our unconscious. So I'm a visual person. So if you picture an iceberg, right? 90% of that iceberg is under the water and you don't see it. There's this 10, sometimes maybe 20% that you see above the surface. His metaphor, that's everything under the water is our unconscious. Everything above the water is what we're conscious of. But we think in our conscious world that we're driving our decisions and we're, moving this iceberg where it's going to go. But where is all the power, right? It's all under the surface.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Living Well podcast. I'm Stephanie May Potter, and I'm here with my co-host, Marnie Dotches-Marmette.
We created the Art of Living Well podcast to empower you to live your happiest, healthiest, and most authentic life. Each week, we will bring you inspiring and motivating conversations covering health and wellness topics, including fitness, mindset, food, travel, product reviews, and strategies from a variety of experts, including our own bank of knowledge.
We are excited to educate, motivate, and inspire you to change the way you perceive health and discover your art of living well. Get ready to feel inspired.
Hello, and welcome to episode 74 of the Art of Living Well podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, we have a few announcements for our podcast community. Stephanie and I have been on the new audio-based social media app called Clubhouse, and we've been hosting a room each Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central. We love this platform because it allows us to interact live with our audience and people that we're talking to. And we've been talking about a number of different topics, including emotional eating and sugar addiction and how to have a healthy relationship with food. And this platform really allows people to interact and ask questions and share their stories. And so we've really enjoyed interacting with people on this app. If you need an invitation, please reach out to us and we would be happy to help you get on the app. We also want to ask that if you're enjoying our podcast, if you could please leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It takes just 2 minutes and it really helps us reach more people so others can benefit from our inspiring conversations and resources that we share each week. If you enjoy the episode, we'd also love if you would share it with a friend, family member, or anyone who you may think would benefit from the information. And now we are thrilled to bring you today's guest, Dr. Gertrude Lyons. Dr. Gertrude Lyons is the lead faculty member, senior life coach, and director of family programs for the Wright Foundation for the Realization of Human Potential. Dr. Lyons is a leading-edge trainer and educator in human emergence, lifestyle, parenting, leadership development, career, relationship satisfaction and success, and women's development. And through her work, she inspires people to take control of their own personal transformations. She has made it her mission to challenge traditional notions of mothering by facilitating raw, open conversations around mothering, womanhood, and parenthood that no one else is having. She has spent her last 18 years empowering individuals, couples, parents, and families to bring out their best selves through helping them realize meaningful, successful lives with the aim of bringing new perspectives on personal transformation to as many people as possible. Today, Dr. Lyons is on a mission to help women reclaim their lives through mothering and create a safe space where women can express their dreams, fears, and truths around motherhood. We are all mothers, and together we can support and empower one another to be the best version of ourselves. Dr. Gertrude Lyons is rewriting the mother code. We loved this conversation with Gertrude where we really dove into the ideas of motherhood and mothering and about being willing to make mistakes and develop your own standards for success and not comparing yourselves to other mothers and really figuring out what your own feminine power is and what mothers can do to grow with their children. But before we dive into this powerful and thought-provoking conversation, let's hear a word from one of our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by our wonderful sponsor, Appetite for Change. Appetite for Change is a nonprofit in North Minneapolis that uses food as a tool for health, wealth, and social change. This year, in light of COVID and the unrest in Minneapolis, Appetite for Change has continued to ground themselves in their mission and center their work around community connection and nourishing food.
They launched a pilot program called Community Cooks Meal Boxes, which provides fresh produce and pantry items, plus 2 recipes for over 300 families at no cost to the family. The program has been such a success that it has been extended for another 6 weeks and will continue into 2021. AFC has utilized the kitchens of their 2 restaurants, Breaking Bread Cafe and Station 81, to produce over 200,000 meals that have been distributed across the Twin Cities to healthcare workers, seniors, and families in need.
In addition, they have 7 farm plots across North Minneapolis that are tended to by community members and Appetite for Change youth learning how to grow a variety of plants. These fresh fruits and vegetables are distributed throughout the North Side. Even in 2021, Appetite for Change is committed to building a more equitable food system by delivering fresh and nourishing food to healthcare workers, seniors, and families in need, tending urban gardens, and more.
We have been collaborating with Appetite for Change over this past year, and we have loved their dedication to their mission, and we so look forward to volunteering with their organization and working with them more in 2021. To learn more about Appetite for Change, listen to episode 31 of our podcast with one of their founders, Michelle Horowitz.
For more information or to donate, head on over to appetiteforchangemn.org/impact or on Instagram and Facebook at Appetite for Change. Gertrude, thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast today. You are a fellow Hey Mama member, and we're so excited to share your energy, knowledge, and inspiration about redefining what it means to be a mother with our listeners.
Well, I am absolutely thrilled, not just as a Hey Mama co-member, but in general, to be with the 2 of you. It's a real privilege and honor. Thank you.
Absolutely. So everyone has a story, and we'd love for you to share your journey and how you are a professional life coach who is focused on exploring, demystifying, and democratizing the maternal power that lives in all women.
Well, it's, do you have all day, right? Because how long do we have, right?
The abbreviated story.
The abbreviated story, right. It's always a little challenging, but when you say like as a life coach, a couple of things I'll highlight there because that whole journey, my journey in my own personal development, which then led to me being a life coach, came when my husband and I got engaged when I was literally 23. Can't even believe that now because I have a 24-year-old daughter. And my boss recommended that when I got engaged, we do premarital. At that time, coaching didn't even exist. So it was counseling, therapy. And I had no idea what he was even talking about. Like, why would somebody do that? Like, I have the love of my life, and everything's going to be wonderful. It's all going to be great. Why do I need to stir anything up? But something, and I'm so grateful for those following those nudges or inklings that we have of like, well, if I look for a second and say, look at my parents' marriage, which was on the brink of divorce and shortly divorced after my husband and I got married, and my husband's family, his mom was twice divorced and, in both families, alcoholism and, all these like things started kind of rolling forward. I'm like, oh, well, if that was my model, maybe there are things you should learn about. Being married and knowing the divorce rate and all of that stuff. So I literally wrote a letter to my husband because we didn't have email at that time, right? This is 1989, because we'll be celebrating 31 years in June. Wrote him a letter saying, hey, what do you think if we like talk to this guy? And he's like, are you crazy? Like what? Do you have skeletons in your closet? So I'm saying all this because, sometimes we have that urge to like want more, do more, and we don't always follow it. But I'm super grateful we did. My husband said yes, which is another like miracle of miracles. And we sat in that first session, and to have somebody, hear our stories and then be able to reflect back like, oh, like it must have been like this in your family, or, I'd never experienced something like the awakening of looking at yourself and understanding yourself so that you can have a relationship that can work. And that's basically what our coach, and who's later become my boss, said at the time was, we'll start off, we'll get you a vision for your marriage together, but then it's up to you to do your individual work. So that journey just has had so many ups and downs, and we've been so many places. But the consistent through line has been always a commitment to our own growth and development, our own coaching, our own, individually and as a couple over this, over this whole period of time. But then the mothering came. I've raised two daughters, really tried to do that as consciously as possible. As I was now shifted careers, and now I'm director of a family program at the Right Foundation for the Realization of Human Potential. I'm training and other women. But it wasn't until my kids were nearing the time to leave the home that I realized that somewhere along the way, I had started leaving myself out of this growth equation, right? It became all about the kids, and it became about them having the best life possible and my husband's business succeeding. And I really did. And not until I stopped, and there's a whole story behind how that came up, but really reflected back and looked at how I had left myself behind. And so I didn't want that. When I hit that regret and remorse, I wanted something different for other women. That led me to my master's and doctoral in transformational leadership and coaching, which highlights the transformational opportunity in mothering. And then that has become this movement, this space that I'm really trying to expand and explore for women around this transformational opportunity that I call rewriting the mother code. So that was still long, but it was a lot shorter than it could be.
No, that was perfect. And I loved hearing your story. And I'm so in awe, actually, at the age of, I think you said 23, 24, when you got engaged, that you had these pretty deep conversations with your husband or your fiance at the time, and that someone gave you this great advice to go talk to someone else, right?
Yeah.
And, just having this vision for your marriage, that's not something that a lot of people talk about.
No, and even 30 years later, it's, coaching's more, it's a little more,
mainstream,
okay,
maybe. Yeah.
Mainstream. Yeah. But back then, forget it. This only meant something was wrong. And you only did that if you had serious problems. And this whole preventative, let's not just avoid, the worst case scenarios. How do we actually have a fulfilling, successful relationship? Like that just, was mind-boggling, to me, but we did it, and I'm so grateful following those urges and inklings.
Yes. So that in and of itself is
congratulations
great.
On your
congratulations
years of marriage.
I know.
Yes. And it, it's helped you along your journey to where you are today, right?
Everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Like I don't think I could be doing what I'm doing if I was sitting there trying to say oh, and we did it all so perfectly and it was just this blissful ride. I mean, no, it was messy and hard. And, this whole losing myself and my children, I'm a little bit on the verge of tears right now, just when I think about that cost of that, and how it could be different and what would have happened if I hadn't. But, it's never a waste if we decide we're going to keep growing ourselves and share it with others.
Well, and it had you not been through that experience and losing yourself, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing today, right?
Exactly.
In this exact platform. So,
and I was just going to add to that. I think that you saying even losing yourself, to your children, that's so common, right? I mean, so that happens to so many women, even unintentionally. Like you said, you throw yourself into your kids because you want to, right?
I know.
And somewhere along the way, you can get lost. Yeah. And I think we've all experienced that, at least for moments in
for sure.
motherhood.
Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's what kind of led to, I have 14 myths of motherhood, and at least three of them revolve around the fact of, the myth that, your children come first and then your relationship and then your career and then you, right? As opposed to what it means to put yourself first and what does that look like and what can that look like? But it's, we're wired as women to care. So that's a beautiful thing. But unless we mother ourselves and care about ourselves, we're not as available.
Right. And we want to dive into those codes and everything, but can we just back up 1 second?
Sure.
Can you explain to everyone what's the difference between motherhood and mothering? And how are you
Yeah.
trying to change our ideas about motherhood?
Yeah. And and what I'm hoping to do is expand our scope, our vision, the potential in this powerful aspect. I consider it kind of a feminine value or quality because it can extend even, to men or the masculine in a way. But mothering as so motherhood, I distinguish as the raising of children, right? Like that job, that particular choice that we make and how something we're going to mother in our life, right? And there's a whole myriad of choices and everything that goes along with that. But we don't just mother children, we mother anything that we choose to put our heart and care into, our careers, our other relationships, our husband, but our dreams and our ideas, anything that comes in our purview that we, conceive, create, and can give birth to, I put in the mothering realm, but motherhood is for sure its own distinct experience of mothering. And I always, kind of want to make that clear, that aspect. I'm not trying to say it's ever like the same thing, right? But there's so many parallels. And one of the reasons for that for me is, so that we as women don't feel like, because, you're not a woman unless you mother a child, or you're not, and it also brings us all more on one team. And I think our call is, to consciousness as women to come together and be on one team as women. This is a place that we can meet, and not divide.
I love that. So, diving in a little deeper to mothering, can we talk about the three codes of mothering that you kind of go over? I think it's the childhood codes, cultural codes, and cosmic codes.
Yeah. Well, and I'll kind of reverse order it because we really just spoke about the cosmic code, which is the expanded definition, and changing and really kind of blowing up the paradigm that we have that limits us, as women when we just think of it so narrowly. But the childhood code. So, when we look at this bigger spectrum of mothering, we're wired in our childhoods by our closest caregivers, right? Generally, that if we speak generally, if it's your birth mother or adoptive mother, but sometimes it's not the mother, there's someone else that takes over your caregiving. So, but the people that you're spending the most time with is what wires us, not only what we think the job of mothering is, what mothering is, but how to do it, right and wrong ways. And we really want to bring to consciousness, our as much as we can around what those beliefs are. Some of them are mistaken beliefs. Some of them are ones that, are negative and things that we say, like, I'm going to definitely not do that. Right. So we call that reacting. That's a reactive choice then around our childhood codes. Or, something was, that I don't see anything wrong and I'm just going to kind of do what I know to do, what I was raised to do. But we're not really making a fully conscious choice unless we separate those out, really look at them and see what's driving our choices, right? I always use the metaphor of an iceberg. Are you familiar with that metaphor? Freud was the first one. He gets a lot of flack, but he did such amazing things around bringing to the forefront, looking at our unconscious. So I'm a visual person. So if you picture an iceberg, right? 90% of that iceberg is under the water and you don't see it. There's this 10, sometimes maybe 20% that you see above the surface. So his metaphor, that's everything under the water is our unconscious. everything above the water is what we're conscious of. But we think in our conscious world that we're driving our decisions and we're, moving this iceberg where it's going to go. But where is all the power, right? It's all under the surface. And I just think that it's a little daunting, but also really hopeful to think like, wow, what's under there? There's so much to explore and so much that can just show us about the choices and decisions that we're making. I'm sorry, I was thinking about one other thing with the childhood code. Sorry, that I wanted to say about that is to give an example. Like I hear so many women will say like, oh, I know I want to have kids, right? Like that's just common. Or they'll say like, I know I definitely don't want to have kids. But they kind of leave it at that. Like it's just something I've known since I was 3 or, and that. But I have found that until you really dig in, sometimes I think I really want to, but it's not happening or I don't want to. That's the kind of thinking that we have that we think we just know. But once we explore it, it's really useful to see like, where did that choice come from or where did that come from? So I wanted to share that example of how that could work.
Well, and it also makes me think of how people, some women just get married and have babies and they don't even think about it because that's just the way it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get married and you have your babies, and that's what we're programmed to do.
Yep. Which leads us to the cultural, right? So you're asking about the cultural code. So, oh my God, right? So first of all, to frame mothering is a cultural, construct, right? So if you, I always encourage women to explore the field of mothering, right? And like its history and the mythology around it, to kind of understand that we sit in a particular place that's saying, this is how you mother, or this is how you, if in motherhood, this is how you raise children and this is how you should feel and what you should do. I mean, how many books, and experts are out there to tell us what the right way is. It's mind boggling. Right. And we're also very new culturally to, yes, we have, just since the 70s, that birth control really became a thing to say we have choice and whether we want to have a child or not. But it's still not, ask any woman who's chosen not to have a child, how often she's asked, why don't you have children? Oh, okay. And whether it's a spoken judgment or a felt, judgment, they're strong and still there. And it's going to take some time, to disrupt those, but unless we bring them to consciousness, we won't know. Right. So so the thinking that there's a right way or, what you decide is the right way. And that's everything from, if you're going to have children and how you're going to raise them and am I going to work and all these things that cause so much strife. It's really good to unpack like how much of that is driven culturally in our choices versus coming from within.
Yeah. I mean, I love this. And I love these 3 codes. So how do you work with people either individually or one-on-one to really debunk, kind of go deep for that individual into these codes and how that's impacted their lives?
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's a great question because it's one of the things when I was doing my doctoral studies, and what I did for that was I did a curriculum evaluation study. So I put together a curriculum, a 12-hour at that time, a 12-hour workshop training specifically for women who didn't have kids, to explore this topic, right? And what I noticed in preparing for that and looking at the literature and all that, there's a lot around the theory of mothering, but not a lot about applied. So if I come to these new discoveries or, I think I want to do this, how do you do it? And it's something I really value about the Right Foundation that I've talked about and the Right Graduate University, which is where I got my doctorate, is it's an applied, paradigm psychology, theoretical, where we have assignments and we have models of transformation. There's something that I teach or train the people I work with called the Right Developmental Model. And it looks very complex when you see a picture of it. It's this stair-step kind of theoretical, I kind of shied away from it for years, and our founder, Dr. Bob Wright, who founded it, it's like, this model's amazing. And I'm like, it looks really way too complicated for me until I had to study it. But what it's a map, and it's a map of consciousness, and it allows you to find yourself. So as you're exploring, some of these unconscious things and you're becoming aware of them, and then you're in interactions or you're making choices and feelings come up, you can see, where was I at developmentally? And what am I feeling as I'm making these choices so that I can understand, where my choices are coming from, and then apply a principle of, an existential principle, for example, of choice, and that it's my choice. I get to decide, even though my upbringing would say this, I can make a new choice, but I'm going to have to practice that choice. And then there would be assignments around how to, once you've explored a mistaken belief or somewhere where you've been limited in your thinking, then we have a series of assignments to help you practice it. Because we have to build new muscles and new wiring, to replace some of that old wiring. We call it your matrix, the matrix you developed as a child. We need to understand what it is. And then through assignments and, we can talk about some examples of that, but, through assignments and all sorts of ways, then we can practice living the different way.
Interesting. So there really are rewiring, their thought process and their brain process, and you kind of walk the person through that, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
Step by
exactly.
step.
Such a big part of it is the awareness, right? The exploration.
Mhm.
It does mean looking back, we don't want to dwell in our childhoods, but there's a lot of really good data there, and why we operate the way we operate. You know, um, and then once we see what those are, we can decide, well, which one of these are working for me, and which one of them aren't. They worked for us as children. So to say that, right? We've come up with some of these behaviors or this thinking because it's what worked in our family system. It's, how we chose to be, from a survival sort of construct, right? But now as adults, we forget that we have more choice, right? It's kind of being let out of a cage, but you're so used to being in that cage, you just kind of stay in that small framework, to then discover that you have a lot more choices and there's other ways to be, but you need support and kind of guidelines on what are some ways that I can take steps, small steps that lead to bigger change that will launch me into that new thinking or those new behaviors.
I love this. I love this whole topic about diving into your past, but not letting that define who you are, because we do have all these programs, like the matrix that you talked about.
Yeah.
And rebuilding, and the fact that you work with people to really do some practical applications, to reprogram your brain. And I know one of the things that you've talked about kind of personally, if you want to share, is
Sure.
on your own podcast, is your 27 years of sobriety, and kind of a little bit about how you made that decision quite a long time ago based on what you knew and your husband about your own upbringings.
No, thanks. Yeah, that came about because I was at that time in one of our programs at the Right Foundation. It's called our transformational lab, where, you put yourself in this exploration and are given assignments to practice, right? And somebody in the group I was in decided or was given an assignment for a period of time of no drinking, right? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really, of course I was aware, my mom is a recovering alcoholic. As I said, Rich is my husband's father, stepfather, and beyond, all had drinking issues. So I knew it was prevalent in our family, but it was kind of more out of curiosity. Like, I wonder, I don't, think it's that big of an issue for me. And I discovered so I said, I just kind of gave myself that assignment, and said, I'm going to do this too. And my first weekend doing it, we were with Rich's family, and I literally got sick. It's hit me so deeply, like what it was like to be in that family for a whole weekend and not drink was super stirring, super upsetting. I'm like, wow, like if this is the impact it feels like to just say no for this weekend, I guess this is a bigger issue than I thought, because I consider myself a social drinker or whatnot. So, it was more, kind of, I didn't say like, oh, from now on, I'm never going to drink. It was like, well, let's keep doing this. And so then what happened was I found so many positives out of it. The clarity, right? The like, oh, I have my whole weekend back. And I was one of those people that couldn't have one drink without feeling it the next day. And I could wake up in the morning and feel clear and refreshed. So all these positives started happening. But then I started pointing the light at my husband. And that was a little bit longer journey. And there's a number of stories regarding that. He was a little more resistant to it, but he saw his own things over the course of probably a couple of years where we both came to the conclusion, like this is one of those things like we could do like, moderate and whatnot, but why? We love how we feel when we're not drinking, and we're in our 20s again, remember? Like this is he's just out of grad school. We're in that very hep social, scene. We're young consultants in Chicago. Like it was a very much again against the societal norm, but we just kept focusing on how much it brought us together. We were, being able to relate to each other more genuinely, more authentically, without alcohol. And so we just kind of kept saying yes to it. And then at one point said, like, I think we could just say we're not ever going to drink again, and I don't know what will change our mind on that. So it's just been a lifestyle choice that we've made that we've been really happy with.
And how did that affect your relationships? I'm just curious. I'm actually doing dry January right now.
Oh yeah.
I'm not a huge drinker, even not doing dry January,
Yeah.
but because my dad is also a recovering alcoholic. And so I'm very sensitive to alcohol in general. But I just thought, oh, I'm going to do dry January because why not? And
you're probably noticing things and learning things.
I mean, a little
didn't
bit,
expect.
but like I said, I'm not a huge drinker to begin with. So I enjoy a nice glass of red wine or white wine, but it's not a huge part of my life on a daily basis.
Sure.
But I do notice other people around me and how their behaviors are affected by my not drinking. And I find that interesting.
It's super interesting. And that was, a bit maybe not totally unexpected, but really something that we had to navigate and sort through. And, in general, one of the things that we noticed was, at the beginning when we were still kind of uncomfortable with it and weren't, sure. And, it was new, that the more kind of uncomfortable and not like fully committed to it yet was the more uncomfortable other people were. That was interesting, right? And once we became like, yeah, this is, who we are, how we are, like we got much less of a reaction. But it was, at that time and challenging just to notice and then, not judge. I also will admit that like probably in the first like few years of doing this, I was a little bit of a overzealous advocate. And, thought like, this is so great. Everyone should do it. Why don't you try? And I think, that understandably would cause ripple effects, but I think it just puts into light, like it's so normal and, common that when someone isn't, it's just like, oh, wow. And then it kind of in some way forces us again, unconsciously to say like, I wonder what that would be like for me or what are my, and to be perfectly honest, like I think people that unknowingly or knowingly struggle with it a bit were the ones that had the biggest reactions, it was, and, some that just I had to get mad at a few people, like when I said, that persistently offered alcohol to us, no matter how much I said, we don't drink. And I just finally had to get really mad at a couple of them, like, please just stop. Like why? But I think again, it's like their discomfort, the unconscious kind of behavior on their part.
Well, absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Usually it's more them, not you, it's
I know
they're dealing with something, right?
Yeah. And you have to keep that, for sure in perspective, and that's some of when I talked about this developmental model is to like noticing that upset in myself and other people's negative responses, like how am I going to deal with that myself, and how am I going to stay true to myself in the midst of that?
Thank you for sharing that
Oh, for
personal story
sure.
with us. And now we will take a quick break from this episode to hear a word from our sponsor. Have you been thinking about a new home build, remodel, or even rework of a smaller space in your home? We have all spent more time in our homes over the past year, and many people are trying to recreate spaces in their homes to bring more joy and functionality to fit their lifestyles. It can be really hard to know where to turn, but Sarah and Marcy, co-founders of Chisel Architecture, are the experts that will help you gain clarity and confidence around your project.
One of the unique aspects of Chisel Architecture that sets them apart from others is their trademark design approach called Pattern of Life. This approach is a game changer for homeowners and how they experience the design process. Marcy and Sarah really listen to you to fully understand your needs and advocate for you during both the design and implementation process. When you think about your home environment and how it supports you, Chisel Architecture believes your overall well-being should be in the mix.
Sarah and Marcy want you to live well in your home. Because they are so passionate on their design approach, they have a special offer for our listeners. Book a 2-hour consultation and receive $50 off.
Simply email them at hello@chiselarc.com. That's at HELLO@CHISELARCH.com and mention the Art of Living Well podcast to receive your $50 off. Consultations must be booked by June 30th to take advantage of this offer.
I'm wondering if we can change gears a little bit and talk about guilt and mom guilt, and maybe we can debunk some of the myths surrounding mom guilt.
Yeah. Well, earlier on, as we talked about this whole, I think that one underlying factor around mom guilt is, these social constructs, and particularly in our day and age of the right way to mom, right? And then tying in also that whole, like we definitely, can find and have allies in other women, but when it's so driven by our own insecurity that our judgment of others comes out so much stronger than it needs to be as we try and justify our own choices, in our mothering. So that, that absolutely doesn't help. And how do we mute or lessen the force of other people's judgments on us? Because that's where so much of the guilt comes, right? Is feeling like we're not doing it right, or we're not living up to someone else's standards. And it could be mother-in-law, friends, it's a lot, oftentimes those standards. And then we feel guilty for making the choices that we're making. So that's like one way, right? So and this is where I haven't, talked about necessarily, in something that in the course of whether it's coaching or, in workshops, that a key factor in any of these and in anything we're taking on in life is having a vision, right? When I said that about our couple, like what's my vision for myself as a mother, and in my mothering or in my motherhood, what is it that I feel like my job is? What am I claiming, and then sorting through, like, where does that come from, and coming to some of those, because until you, and then you, as if you're in a couple, kind of come to what your standards are, and what it means to have a successful functioning family, then you can measure against those, right? And you can have a vision that you're working toward, and for yourself, and then for the family. And then, you're measuring against those standards versus like these social or family constructs that we think we're supposed to, right? And then feel guilty about not meeting.
I love that. I love how you framed that, because I don't think I've ever, not, I don't have to say ever, and probably in recent years, have kind of have a vision, for myself. But I think, like, just the way you said that, if you're going to measure yourself against your own standards, which is really the only set of standards that matter at the end of the day, right? Versus, we grow up, I just think of myself in particular, and I think a lot of women, comparing ourselves to others. I mean, and then also, it's not just how we look, but or our weight, or what we're doing in life or who we're marrying or whatever it is, or how
Mhm.
we're mothering. So I mean, I'd love to know more about like how you help people get there, because I think that's really powerful. Once you have like your set of standards, then you're confident and comfortable in your own skin. And then that guilt, the guilt probably just sort of goes away.
And
Yeah.
I actually want to add one more thing to what you said, because I
Yeah.
also have never thought about what is my vision for myself as a mother.
Mm.
And when I was thinking about that question as you were talking, I was thinking about how when my kids were really little, I think that vision was very different than what it would be today, having, you know, a kid in college and a kid in high school and a kid in middle school. Like the vision will change over time. And maybe, you know, I'm going to have grandchildren someday, and maybe that's a big maybe, but
Exactly.
my vision will change again, like mothering adult children, or you know what I mean? So
Yeah, the
I love
perspective. And
that.
so, I love that you're pointing out like because the fluidity of a vision, right? Or the expanding capacity of a vision. But there might be through lines, that kind of carry over in all of them in a vision. Like I may, in part of my vision, recommend, but this has to be something any woman would have to choose, is that in all of them, I am going to, my vision is that I mother myself, or my vision is that I am going to learn and grow and develop and grow myself up, use it as a vehicle for my own transformation, heal past wounds through it, that I'm engaged with myself as much as I am with my children in all these facets. Cause I will say for myself, like I had a stronger vision when they were little, um, around my growth and development. When I say I, lost myself, it's as they got a bit older, and particularly as teenagers. And, that's where I really left myself, and didn't hold on to this vision of transformation of myself, particularly because it was such a stirring time, and I kind of just, I went from like feeling like my job is not to be their friend. It's to, make them independent, strong adults. And if they don't like me, great, to suddenly like, oh, I hope they like me and I hope their friends like me. And, not this like weirdly, like I want to be a cool parent, but enough of it where I know I didn't stay in my own power as a mother. And we all kind of, you know, had challenges because of that. So, maybe this, there are some through lines, but it's going to look different, and to stop and kind of reconsider at these different particular, age ranges of children where they're so different, and it's going to stir up and bring up new things that you thought you had kind of handled, with them at a certain age, but now is coming on at a whole nother level in a different age.
So true. I mean,
Right.
Yes.
it's so relatable and true. And there's so many moments throughout mothering or motherhood
Mm-hmm.
where that can happen.
What's one thing, kind of simple, practical, that you can do to be focused a little bit more on yourself and your growth and development?
No, I think that's great. So if we stick with the vision area, always when I first start working, even before we dive in deeply to exploring, past history and all of that, I ask women to just literally set a timer for anywhere from 2 minutes to no more than 5 minutes, and just let yourself flow of like, without overthinking, like what at this moment you feel like you would name as your vision, for yourself as a mother, and what is, and even open, and then an open-ended question, what is mothering? So that you can then kind of look at that and explore them. What do you like about what you wrote, in the what is mothering, and is there parts of that you want in your vision? So, that's something anyone can do, and then look at themselves and kind of explore, like, how does this feel? What do I like about it? Make the distinction between a vision, which is, the how you want to feel, principles, qualities of it, versus a goal. It's not going to be so measurable or concrete, but we'll have goals that serve the vision. And that's a next step in coming up with it. But that'll help illuminate where you might want to look, and where some of the, how do I feel? How challenging will it be for me to live this vision? And what will be in the way of me living this vision would then be, next steps that you can take. And then I can give another like really practical thing that I love to always share whenever I'm talking about mothers and families and growing with your children, because we haven't really covered in another thing that we work on in the coaching and the programs is really reawakening and our awareness and our expression of our five emotions, of our core emotions, and becoming much more friendly again with our emotional well-being, our and what our emotions are to us. And those five emotions are fear, hurt, anger, sadness, and joy. So always when I first say those, people are like, well, why are four of them bad and one of them's good, right? So that's like the first mistaken belief we have about our emotions, is that there's good ones and bad ones, right? They all have a function and power and can all lead us, more to know ourselves better and get closer to the people around us when they're used responsibly, right? So, so much of our curriculum and, what I introduce people to revolves around getting it reacclimated and reopening ourselves to that. So the assignment out of that one that I'll often, pretty early on give an individual or parent, a mother, is because it involves like an interaction with the child that benefits both of you, which is, at some point in your day, usually we did this at dinner time with my family, and we'd play the feelings game. And so instead of saying, how was your day, to your kids, and then they just like, fine, good, bad, whatever, we would go through each of our days, naming somewhere we felt each one of those five emotions. And every time we did it, it illuminated and just brought, if anything, like more color. We got to know each other better, and we're practicing identifying when we feel those emotions. It's really powerful, simple, but so powerful. And my husband and I, we do it ourselves. Like, we have a discipline to do it, a few times a week, just ourselves.
I love that. I mean, we do something, we just kind of say like, what's your high and what's your low? And that's been great. But I feel like we've been doing that now for like 10 years or whatever, and they get in a little bit of a rut with it, and then they just make a joke of it, or, sometimes it doesn't illuminate much, where when they were younger, you'd actually find out some things about their day.
Yeah.
So I want to switch and start to like transition into this conversation at dinner. I love that suggestion.
I do too. And so I'm still stuck on the fear, hurt, anger, sadness piece of it. Okay, so when you're doing this every day or every dinner, let's say, they're coming up with something from
that's
their
an ideal, right? Like every day is an ideal, but of course,
one time, whatever it is, you come up with, they have to come up with those four things, and then just one joyful thing.
Yeah.
Right. No, but I'm just saying, like, what if your day didn't have any fear or anger in it? Like, are you assuming everybody's day has fear and anger in it?
I'm not assuming it. I know it. Right.
Okay.
Like this is where, the science of our emotions, and so much, there's like plenty of research to back up the fact that we've learned how to manage our emotions, and we've learned to like block them in so many ways that we don't realize, like in every, second. Like I've been through every one of those five feelings in our time together. Right. And I think I mentioned it before we started, like no matter how many of these do, I'm always scared, and I always have some fear. But just by naming that, I then felt more present and at ease with myself. And sometimes they would have a hard time finding it, but that's the beauty of it, right? Like we know, and I would always know that I did and they did, because we're feeling machines. It's part of our physiology. We can't make decisions without emotions. We're having them all the time. It's an awareness that once we bring it to the forefront, and some of them in our upbringings have been okay, some not. So someone may be able to name certain ones very easily, and other ones like, nope, didn't have it. It's like, no, you just are blocking it.
Interesting.
But I think it's important. I can see what you're saying. I mean, when I bring this up, I'm sure I'm going to get a little backlash, right?
Oh, for sure. And believe me, my daughters did. They weren't always some families, some of the kids are like, let's do it, whatever. My kids were usually like, oh, I'd get the eye rolls, I'd get the this, but then we'd do it. And every time, like everyone would be like a little happier. And, and I didn't know if later how they would think of it and appreciate it, but I have been vindicated with them as young adults, and that to appreciate it and have one daughter even write like one of her college papers on it. I hated doing that thing, but wow, like now I'm really seeing the benefit, and things like
Right.
that.
Well, I think we mask in kids, we suppress emotions. Like, I don't know that they will fully understand. When something big happens, they understand when they're hurt or they're scared. But like you said, these are all emotions that we're experiencing on a daily basis. And
Mm-hmm.
I think for some people too, and maybe it's just, like I have two boys and one girl, and they're all different. And I know that they're experiencing some of these things, like you said, but they will never admit it. They don't even realize or recognize it.
Right. Because
And we're kind of numbing a little bit too. And I think maybe social media
so
and being
much.
on screens, like there's a lot, I'm sure, that goes into it. So I think this could be really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We'll
Just
have
to
to
notice
experiment and
Yeah.
report back to you.
Oh, I would
We
love that.
will.
Families.
I
Yes.
really hope to hear how that goes, and what some of the reactions are and what you learn. And that's the beautiful thing. It's all like, it'll reflect something in data. There's no lose in trying, it, because we'll get to see.
I'm all about doing science experiments, whether it's food or this type of thing. So my
Yeah,
kids
it's
are
a
used to me
psychological
coming up.
experiment, right?
Yes, yes. Can we change gears a little bit and talk about brain sex and the neuroscience of feminine power? We'd love to hear and learn a little bit more about this.
I know it's such a sexy title, right? Brain sex.
Yeah.
But what that's all, and masculine, feminine power. So I always like to preempt that with, we're not talking gender so much, or male, female quite so much. Although, there's a lot of science that show that women's brains and men's brains are different, right? So our brains and how we're wired through evolution, for survival reasons, have been wired in different ways. And it's only, that research had been around a lot longer than it was actually brought to the forefront, because it's, it shakes up and breaks some of the beliefs we have about masculine power and feminine power. And we live, I think we can all, I don't think there are that many people that would disagree that we live in an over masculine valued world, but for sure our culture, our Western and American culture is, way overvalues masculine thinking, masculine ways of being versus the feminine, and that's somewhat we've been talking about, right? Mothering with caring. And if you think circular versus linear, and logic versus intuition, so if we just even name some of these masculine, feminine qualities. But it turns out that science has shown differences in our brains. And so, for example, one is that the corpus callosum, or the wiring between the right and left brain, we have a lot more connectivity between the two, right? So we are able to multitask better than men. We can hear a lot of conversations. I don't know if you've ever noticed, like when a group of women together, like we don't all have to take turns talking, like, and the conversation is a bit circular, and it's like, so you're talking about this, oh, now we're back to this, and oh, this, and you can hear everybody, that's partly because of our wiring, and if we think about, and some of them make so much sense too, if we think about our senses that are different. I love some of these because they really can make a difference in relationship with men, both, in your relationship, but even business wise, when we understand some of these things. So, if you think evolutionarily, men as hunters, because there was often that division of labor more, that to hunt, you had to focus, you had to, your sight only, was limited so that you could really focus in and do that job. Whereas women as gatherers, our peripheral vision is much wider. So a couple fun things about that are, I'll ask people, who do you think ogles the opposite sex more, men or women? Right. And the studies show that women actually do it more. They just don't get caught. And that's because we have this huge periphery vision. So I can be looking at you two on the screen, but over here is this cute guy that I'm checking out. But no one would ever know because I can see him and whoa. Whereas a guy has to literally look that way. And I know some of these like seem kind of silly, but they, in relationship, these can cause issues, and hearing, when you think about mothering children, like when, well, this is kind of hearing in our consciousness, like and also explains like, you know, a lot for women, which is that at rest, a man's brain is like 70% at rest, and with a 30% kind of consciousness at the most, whereas a woman's brain is like 90% still active and 10% resting, right? So we hear the baby cry and they're like, what? I didn't, I didn't hear anything.
True. I mean,
Yeah.
that's so true.
That's so true on like a daily basis in my house. I mean,
mine too. I mean, I love hearing that backed by science.
Yes,
I know,
yes.
isn't it?
It makes me
And it's
feel
not
so much better.
excuses, but it helps us like understand and know what we need to do to like it. And I'll name one other one because I love this one, which is in when I said this about men being focused, right? So when a man is like at the computer or reading, or on his phone, he's literally like 70% deaf, right? Yeah.
I think it's more like 90.
I think it might be 90, right? I think so too, which is like why you're over here and you're like, da, 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 like, I can't, and why don't you pay attention to me? And all those things that start coming up,
Yes.
like, why can't you have to like literally get in front of them or put the paper down and say, as soon as you're done with that, I have something to say. And it's not like they can't work on it too, but you get to like discover things about each other. And, but some of that is just to illuminate. There's just so many aspects of us as women and what we value and how we operate, or feminine thinking and values. And we're seeing that in our world, in our country, right? Like, it's not just like women deserve to be equal. It's like, no, we absolutely have to have these two kinds of relating and thinking, working synergistically for us to make any headway. And we're seeing that proven, right? We're seeing the women in leadership, and as how adding women is making companies, allowing companies to do better, than before for different reasons, right? So it's not man bashing or negating that. We're just got to bring the two back more in balance, and that takes us, really believing that these superpowers that we have really do have value, and that takes some work.
I was also going to say, I think just understanding what you just said and knowing how, a man's brain and a woman's brain can work together and in collaboration instead of, fighting one another. Yep. I think just having that understanding is super helpful. I mean, yesterday, my husband was literally on his phone and I was like jumping in front of him. I'm not even kidding. I was like, hello, do you hear me? Like, hello. Because he was like, I was talking and he was not responding. And I was like, do you even hear me?
Right. But we'll take that personally. And then we'll think like we don't matter. And, we have then all these other beliefs that's affirming, as opposed to like, no, I'm going to make myself heard and we're going to work this out together.
And I love hearing that because my husband can just tune stuff out. I'm talking to him. He's like, oh, well, after you said I don't have to worry about, dropping someone off or a carpool, I didn't listen to anything else you said. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm still talking. We're still having a conversation. So
but the logistical part of it's done. And, and we're more emotional but men need us to like help bring them to their emotions, and we need to value them and kind of lead the way in that perspective. Because obviously there's a lot of beliefs amongst all of us around why they are and aren't okay.
And sometimes I need them to take me out of my emotions.
Right. Like,
and remind me,
ground me. And
this is too, you're thinking about this too emotionally. And, let's think about this reasonably. So there really is that give and take.
And also, I've worked with a lot of couples that need to make kind of guidelines or agreements that sometimes when I just want to express, I'm not looking to get it fixed. Women work things out by talking and expressing sometimes. And so, the man can kind of know that and say, all right, is this one of those times you just need me to listen? Or are you looking for like help to strategize and fix this? So then we're not getting mad. Like, why do you always like, why are you cutting me off? Or why do you have to, just fix this? I just want you to listen to me. But they can, you can coordinate that together better.
That's where the girlfriends come in my life.
Yep.
Right.
That too. That too, right? We need
Absolutely.
100%.
Well, Gertrude, as we start to wrap up this
Sure.
awesome conversation, can you tell people where they can find you? Social media, your website. I know you have a podcast.
I do. I have all of those, and they're all very similar. So on Instagram, I'm at Dr. Gertrude Lyons, and my website is www.drgertrudelyons, and it's drgertrudelyons.com. My podcast is Rewrite the Mother Code with Dr. Gertrude Lyons. So those are all 3 ways that, you can find me socially. I'm also on LinkedIn as Dr. Gertrude Lyons. So, search any of those. You should find me, right? In that regard, for sure.
And we'll link all that up in the show notes too.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
And as we wrap up, one question we like to ask all of our guests is, what does the art of living well mean to you?
Yeah, I've went a couple ways when I thought about that, because there's the art, adding the art of, there's living well, and that can take a lot of, directions, like physically living well, emotionally, spiritually, but adding the art of it, I think for me that means my authoring, ownership, as the artist, designing, weaving, crafting. But I'm 100% responsible, for this well living, and to then see it as, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We've kind of talked a little bit about my journey, that all of that is beautiful when you see it, in one piece, and the image that came to mind when I thought of it too was literally the Grand Canyon. And, it's this beautiful art in nature, and it's lived well through millennium, and it's carved, the weathering of it and what it's gone through is what's made it so beautiful. So I think, living well is our wounds. It's what's beautiful. It's, how we take care of ourselves. It's the whole picture.
Oh, I love that. It's beautiful. That analogy that you gave with the Grand Canyon. Yeah. I mean, we ask this question of everyone, and we love everyone's response because they're all unique, but that really took it to another level. So,
and I also love how yes, thank you. That I agree with Stephanie. And I love how you said that you're the author and you're creating.
I'm responsible, no
you're responsible. Exactly.
Which is great and challenging sometimes, right?
Well, but if you're not feeling like you're living well, then what can you do about it?
Exactly.
And don't dwell on the challenges and your journey and the things that have been difficult. That's what's shaped you, who you are, like the Grand Canyon analogy. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, this has been such a treat. I love being with the two of you. I don't want to go, but yes.
Yeah, I know. Well, we'll have you back on again. Yes.
Well, I would love that. And yes, you'll expect invitations. I hope that maybe someday you would be on mine as well.
We would love that.
Yeah. Well, have a wonderful day, Gertrude.
Thank you so much for listening to the Art of Living Well podcast. We are so grateful that you joined us today.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or anyone else you think may benefit from this information. We'd love for you to subscribe to our podcast, leave us a review, and tag the Art of Living Well podcast on social media.
If you want more inspiration in between episodes, you can find us on social media at theartofliving_well on Instagram and Facebook, where we will share snippets from our daily lives and our journey to living well.